Okay.
That's right.
Depends on what you define.
Does your sword whistle when you swing it?
No.
It's kind of lame then.
We'll make you swing it fast.
Okay.
Anything will whistle if you're swinging fast enough.
All right. Is the Christian life experiential or intellectual? Christian faith, is it about the experience and the relationship with God, or is it about the intellectual truth to which we ascribe?
I would say one can't really go without the other. They work together, but
Cheater answer.
I would say it leans more towards belief more than knowledge, but
Okay.
I think they both have their parts. And personally, since I'm typically more logical, I would go towards knowledge.
Mhm.
But like I said, I think they both have value. Overall, probably belief more though.
Okay. Jack?
I kind of said the same thing, but I basically just said you need the intellectual aspect as like a basis for everything.
Okay.
But the relationship and faith should be more personal, because you can't like believe what someone else is believing.
You have to have the intellectual truths, and for you at least, the intellectual truths then inspire the personal and the experiential. Okay.
I think belief is more important in a way, because it is the belief in Jesus who is our Savior as like the core.
Yeah, but even that comes with an intellectual confession, right?
Yeah.
Because the follow along to that is then who is Jesus. It's okay.
I said it leans more towards belief, but you need bits of knowledge. Like to believe in Christianity, you need that Jesus is the Son of God.
Okay.
Who is perfect and died as atonement for your sins.
So perhaps we need at least the creedal intellectualism.
You need to know what you're believing in. Have faith.
That would be good. I mean, that's fair.
I agree with like one of this is like you I lean towards more like belief.
Mhm.
That you have to know it, but I also think you can't lean too much towards belief because sometimes your like experience really
Mhm.
it'll lead you astray because if something bad happens, then it leads you astray.
Yeah. Like before the Bible was translated to Latin, or translated from Latin, and they just believed whatever the preachers preached.
Fair.
That's a little bit too far to the belief.
There's not enough intellectual muster on the life of the individual. Okay.
I agree with the intellectual part, and I agree with part of the belief part, but I don't know if the belief part requires, or if we really need experience in that. Because I think experience relies too much on own experience, and own experiences can be wrong or incorrect.
So perhaps not as much of an emphasis on the existential, but the knowledge still needs to drive that relationship. Fair.
This is probably kind of on the more theoretical side, but don't you also argue like leaders really need to take more importance than the other, and that rather putting like a label on it is kind of a bad idea because you're like,
It's a false dichotomy.
kind of like you're trying to like focus too much on like what's more important, and really you should just be focusing on God as a whole.
Correct. I think I'm in some of that camp. To your point earlier, it's the edge of the quarter. You need both faces, right? You need the personal, the existential to a point, the relationship, obviously, but then you also need the intellectual. Now, all of us, though, will tend toward one of those two things. Okay. Which we'll play it this way. Which do you think I tend toward?
Knowledge.
Yeah, the intellectual, right? My relatedness and that the existential pieces of my faith expression are outgrowths of the intellectual pursuits, right? But said it once, I'll say it probably 100 more times. I need that intellectual pursuit. The internal drive in me and my relatedness to God is to know everything there is to know about God. It's not going to happen. But the compulsion of my relationship with God drives that knowledge machine first. And out of that grows my relatedness. Now, my experience and my observation of Christians is that those of us who are minded toward the intellectual tend to lead a much quieter, experience-driven life with God. It's in the quiet moments, it's in the still moments. It's not as flashy is the wrong word, but it's not as visible, this experience-based thing with God, my relatedness, right? Because it primarily, I'm inclined to the nerdy, right? And so the relatedness pieces tend to be quieter. They tend to be more stilled. They tend to be more contemplative. I'm the individual in the middle of a worship service who's more inclined to sit and contemplate something than to stand with hands raised. It does not necessarily mean I'm not going to. I have. But my inclination is one way or the other, right? For those of us who are inclined to the relatedness, who are inclined to the existential, who are inclined to the experience, who are inclined to the more personal, the more intuitive, our knowledge pursuits come along as complementary to our internal world with the Lord. This is making some semblance of sense to me. Okay, now, my final question. What's the end run? What's the mature Christian to look like? Go ahead.
The end goal is to be like Jesus and spread the good news.
Be like Jesus and share the gospel. Okay?
Yes, the free pass.
Do we have vocabulary other than be like Jesus?
Be faithful to his commandments.
Faithful to his commandments. So obedience?
Yes.
Begrudgingly or willfully?
Willfully.
Right. I would probably add joyfully as well. Willfully and joyfully obedient to what Christ calls us to.
No, in the context of this discussion, I kind of said that like it should be able to about kind of each like the aspects of coverage, just like quality in a way,
Okay.
like a powerful quality.
There's a synergy and a harmony between the two. Okay.
You make the argument that there isn't necessarily such thing as a fully, like absolutely fully mature Christian up until like new body, ascension, heaven, etc.
I think the scripture bears witness to that, and I think that's totally fine. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that there's not a goal to aim at.
I like the verse Acts 20:24 that says, I count my life nothing to me as not like run the race God has set before me and like share the gospel with everyone. I
Sure.
think that's kind of the end goal of Christianity is to follow like what God has set before you and spread him to everybody.
Okay. Even if that means a sort of counting the cost, if you will, in this. Okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
I think there's also, I would say it's a lot about obedience, but then it's also about humility. Knowing
yeah.
that you aren't the bigger picture. You aren't the lead or control.
Sure. Which I think is really complicated for us as human persons, right? And as Christians, we like that. God should be the one who's in control of my life. We'll say that quite often, but then when it comes to certain pockets of our lives, we still like to take the reins quite often, daily, right? And this is the tension of the Christian life. Okay, let's take some notes then. I think I've spelled that correctly. Asceticism. Ooh, no, I did not. That should be correct. Asceticism. Yes. Will you give me a definition of that? While he does that, we're talking about ascetic Christian thought. We need a definition of some of this vocabulary because it'll help us with an understanding of what we're talking about.
Severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, typically for religious
Good.
reasons.
Severe self-discipline and avoidance of all indulgence, right? Kind of stoic. Yeah, absolutely. Asceticism grows out of streams of thought that are remarkably like and well developed in stoic thought. Okay? And so we are talking about something that emphasizes the transcendent, especially when we talk about it in religious terminology here. We're talking about something that emphasizes the transcendent and minimizes what is material and in front of us. Often it comes with really strange or harsh or severe sorts of practices. Okay. It comes with individuals going to great lengths to do certain things in the pursuit of something else, and it looks rather odd, especially in our modern constructs with all the luxuries we have of 21st century life. I will say this, however, when we talk about this in terms of Christianity, the focus is on the spiritual, the transcendent. Okay, and it is on the existential, the part of us that is related to God in this sort of dynamic back and forth in a way. It follows the pattern of Jesus and Moses up the mountain. Jesus multiplies bread and fish, and he sends the crowds away. He sends the disciples to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and he goes up the mountain to spend the night in prayer with God. Moses goes up on Sinai to spend the time with God, and then he comes back down and he delivers what he's received to the rest of the world, right? Moses and Jesus go out into the wilderness. Paul goes out into the desert of Arabia to study and to prepare for his calling as an apostle to the Gentiles. Often, it emphasizes solitude and silence. Seclusion. Solitude is different from seclusion or isolation. Solitude is spending time away. Seclusion is sort of an intentional isolation, way away from everybody else. Its primary focus is on a denial of what is material for some kind of focus on the spirituality. Practically, ascetic Christianity does a few key characteristic things, and I want to talk about those right now. First, ascetic Christianity is typically focused on the numinous. We talked about this when we talked about the Mesopotamian stuff. This is the existential. This is the experiential. This is the spiritual. We would probably talk about it better as the spiritual, right? My spiritual life, my spiritual practices, my spiritual habits, my spiritual formation. It's that side that's more relational. It's more experience with God. It's more, I get something out of these quiet, devoted moments in my time reading the scripture or in prayer or in worship or whatever the case may be. Okay? In light of that, spiritual disciplines feature rather prominently. Spiritual disciplines, things like fasting, prayer, silence, solitude. Reading the scripture. The emphasis in this, I shouldn't say emphasis. One of the highlights in ascetic Christianity is the individual pursuit. Now, for most, it's not individualism in the sense of it's just me and Jesus, but it is individual in the sense that every individual has to pursue these things. And so every individual pursues them, but community is still emphasized. Don't take the solitude and the seclusion and the silence as a means to say that this is just about sort of stepping away from everything and just doing the me and Jesus thing and getting out the door. That's not the point. It is going to highlight that, however. Okay? And so we need to pay attention to that. This individual pursuit matters. Okay? Now, historically speaking, this ascetic Christianity is, in some sense, a reaction to or a bit against intellectualized Christianity, and people like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, people like Origen and St. Augustine, who's come along later. There'll be another wave of this. This intellectualism in the early movements to establish orthodoxy and to fight off heresy get reacted to with. That's all well and good, and we should have that. On the other hand, just intellectualized Christianity is not Christian faith. You still need the relatedness part. You still need the spiritual formation part. You still need these moments, because these are the moments where God goes to work and transforms. And so intellectualized Christianity is good, but typically it lacks the formation pieces. That shape a life. You can know something intellectually, but it may not shape the way that you live your life. Ascetic Christianity has decided to reshape a manner of living. What Christian faith needs is truth plus transformation. Now, the deal is that ascetic Christianity begins, by the way, I'm just continuing over here. Ascetic Christianity begins with the belief that truth and transformation, Christian life, needs our participation. The God who willed without you to save you does not wish life with you without you. In other words, your participation is a necessity. God made the choice to provide salvation. And he did it without us necessarily. He chose to do it, and he did it on his own. Great. Wonderful. On the other hand, life with God doesn't work that way. It is to be partnered, and so it needs our participation. Okay? It is, in a way, a kind of Christian stoicism. That is not necessarily to say that this is stealing from Stoic thought, although there are plenty of parallels. It is the suppression of human flesh, human desire, and submission to the will of the divine. It is aimed at the purity in devotion to God or the divine will, but it is emphasizing the fact that we participate with God. In our transformation. We participate with God in our transformation. It's God working in us, but with us to make us sanctified. Okay? Questions at this point? Doing okay? Okay. Let's go to some passages then. Let's look at some scripture that highlights this, and then, actually, let's do this. I'm going to give you the list. I'm going to have you read these, and keeping this in mind, I want you to do some reflecting on these passages. Okay? I'll put up a few questions for you to process through and jot some notes down. We'll pick that conversation up tomorrow when we begin. Okay? With me so far? All right. All right, here you go. Let me make some room. How do I want to do this? I want to do it like this. Matthew 5, 27 through 30. Six, 5 through 15. 19, 16 through 26. Galatians 5, also 16 through 26. Unless I goof something up. Philippians 3, 2 through 11. And Revelation 3, 14 through 22. Okay? These are your passages. This is what we're going to be messing with. Here's the task. In this passage, as you look at it, right, do this for each of the individuals. What does God ask of us? What does the passage indicate about what does the passage indicate about Christian maturity? And then how do we grow toward that maturity? Good? We're gonna start with this tomorrow. Okay, and then we'll move into a couple of individuals. And so here's the game plan. We're gonna start with these passages tomorrow. We'll move into a couple of key individuals in ascetic Christianity. We refer to them in groups. We call them the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. And then Thursday, Friday, we'll have days to practice some of these disciplines. Perhaps we'll even carry it over into next week. Okay? Go.
Is it short?